Our HOA vice president used a master key to force my pregnant wife into the hallway, half-dressed and terrified. No warning, no emergency, no shame. Rachel had 90 days left. High-risk pregnancy, doctor-ordered bed rest. I'd upgraded everything. Filtration systems, smart locks, biometric alerts, so she'd be safe. I filed the paperwork, got approval, followed every rule. None of it mattered. And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't about rules, it was about power. And I was the wrong man to test with power abuse. This is the story of how one camera clip turned a private assault into a public reckoning, and why Marcus Bellamy will never hold another key again. So, tell me, from where are you watching today? It started less than 12 hours after I wrote that intro. The screen flickered once, then twice. Dean Navarro, mid-consultation with a commercial real estate client, barely registered the motion alert on his second monitor. He'd routed his condo's hallway camera to a hidden corner of his display. Standard practice. Years of cybersecurity work had trained him to monitor quietly, unobtrusively. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Until it became personal. At first, it was just the blurry frame of a man in a windbreaker. Then came the unmistakable glint of the HOA-issued master key. Dean leaned closer. The man wasn't just any contractor. It was Marcus Bellamy, vice president of the HOA board, standing outside Dean's unit with a clipboard and 2 maintenance staff behind him. No knock, no call, no emergency. The key turned. Dean pushed his keyboard aside and stood abruptly, heart kicking into overdrive. The hallway camera caught everything. Rachel, his wife, barefoot, confused, wrapped in a thin robe, stepping into view as the door swung inward. She hadn't expected it. She hadn't had time to react. Her hands flew to her belly out of instinct, trying to shield what could not be shielded. Dean watched her mouth something, a plea, a protest, but the camera had no sound. Then the worst part? She stumbled back, her robe loosening, and the maintenance guy averted his eyes while Marcus took one long look before turning away. Dean didn't remember sitting down. He didn't remember ending the call with his client. All he remembered was the sudden weight of his own breath and the sharp, red-hot precision of adrenaline slicing through his veins. He replayed it. Again. Again. He knew the timestamps, knew the logs, knew the exact moment the master key was used and the override protocol ignored. He'd built enough access systems to know when one was being abused. But this wasn't just about systems. It was about Rachel, about the high-risk pregnancy they had fought for after losing the first one, about the hours spent retrofitting their unit with medical-grade filters, touchless entry, and real-time biometric monitors, all to give her a safe, sterile haven until delivery. He had filed everything with the HOA months ago. The upgrades, the non-standard lock, the medical documentation. Everything had been approved until Marcus Bellamy decided it wasn't. Dean opened the footage in his editing software and bookmarked the precise second the door opened, then the frame where Rachel stumbles, then the full shot of Marcus turning away. The HOA called it a compliance check. He called it a trespass, and Rachel, she hadn't said a word since she locked herself in the bedroom. Dean pulled up the system logs and began correlating access events from the last 30 days. He wasn't just going to respond. He was going to show them what a man who builds secure systems for a living could do with a few lines of code, and a reason. Because they didn't just break protocol, they broke her peace, and that would cost them everything. Marcus didn't call, he didn't knock, and now he was pretending it never happened. By morning, Dean had reviewed the security footage frame by frame and submitted an incident report to the HOA portal. No response. By noon, the footage had been taken offline, flagged pending review. Dean had hard copies, redundant backups. But the HOA was already trying to bury what happened, and that made it worse. Rachel hadn't said much. She sat on the edge of their bed, curled around her stomach like the hallway draft still touched her skin. Her robe was folded over the end of the mattress. She hadn't picked it up since. Dean didn't ask if she was okay. He already knew. So he walked. He left the building and took the long route around the community, past the rose garden his wife had donated to last year, past the parking spots that used to belong to their neighbors before they were reassigned for compliance. That was Marcus's word of choice. Compliance. Dean found himself at the dog park. It wasn't much, just a square of turf fenced off from the kids' play area, but it was one of the last communal spaces Marcus hadn't touched, and it was packed. 3 owners were arguing quietly over new leash rules. Another was sitting on the bench, flipping through a violation letter with her mouth tight. Dean recognized the envelope. Same size, same formatting, same color. HOA standard action. Form 4B. He sat next to her. "You too?" he asked. She looked up, startled, then handed him the letter. "Supposedly," she said, "my dog's collar is non-compliant because the tag hangs below the regulation clip line, whatever that means." Dean nodded slowly, folding the letter once and setting it on the bench. "They used a master key to enter my unit yesterday. My wife was inside, pregnant, half-dressed." A pause. "I'm sorry," she said. That's not just overreach. That's criminal." Dean scanned the group. 2 more residents had stopped pretending not to listen. "Marcus?" one asked. Dean nodded. A younger man stepped forward, hoodie pulled tight. "He fined me for storing crutches outside my door. I shattered my ankle last winter. I physically couldn't bring them in every time I got back from work. $60 a day. Took me 2 months to catch up." A retired couple joined in next, sharing how Marcus threatened to call Adult Protective Services on them for refusing to install handrail compliance upgrades at their own expense. Within 15 minutes, there were 9 people in a loose circle around Dean, trading stories like war veterans. None of them had gone public. No one wanted to risk more retaliation. But now that they'd heard what happened to Rachel, one woman, an older resident in a sun hat, leaned in. "We all thought it was just us. Little things, nitpicky stuff. But what he did to your wife? That's different." Dean looked around. For the first time since the violation, his pulse slowed just enough to think clearly. Marcus had been smart until now. He never escalated beyond technicalities, kept everything buried in policy, paperwork, and language no one had time to parse. That's how HOA tyrants survived. They turned neighbors into silent victims. But this wasn't silent anymore. Rachel's trauma had become a fuse, and Dean knew how to wire charges. "Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this," he murmured under his breath, almost amused. "And subscribe to see how this strategy plays out." He walked back toward the condo with 9 stories and one very specific plan beginning to take shape in his mind. Not revenge, not policy arguments, visibility. They'd given him a live case study of abuse, and he knew exactly where to take it. The footage hadn't just captured Rachel, it had captured the lie, the gap between what the HOA claimed and what they did. Now he had allies, timelines, and leverage. But first, he needed someone from the inside, someone who knew how Marcus thought. And he had a feeling he already knew who that was. She was waiting by the maintenance elevator, clipboard hugged against her chest, eyes low, posture tight like she'd been standing there too long. Denise Harlow didn't look like someone who wanted to talk. She looked like someone who already knew what had happened and hated that she had anything to do with it. Dean didn't speak right away. He let the elevator close behind him and walked over slowly, watching her shift her weight from foot to foot. When she finally looked up, her voice was low. "I didn't know she was inside." I swear her fingers were clenched white around the clipboard's edge. "She didn't meet his eyes." Dean nodded once. "But you had the key." She flinched, not visibly, just a twitch in the jaw, but enough. "I was told it was a compliance check," she said. "Marcus flagged your unit for lock irregularities. Said the override code wasn't responding, and he needed visual confirmation. He made it sound like it was routine." Dean waited. "He said you weren't home." She finally looked at him now, sharp and wet-eyed, the look of someone who'd been told to follow orders and knew damn well she shouldn't have. "I saw her, Dean. I saw Rachel. She was holding her stomach and backing away. Marcus didn't even blink, just told me to make a note of the security violation. He called it non-cooperative behavior." Her shoulders collapsed in, body folding like she wanted to disappear into her work uniform. "You're not the first," Dean said quietly. She blinked. At the dog park this morning, 9 people, all with stories, all scared to say anything. Denise shook her head. I'm just supposed to handle keys and facilities, inspections, water sensors, emergency shutoffs. Not this. Then why did you do it? The words hung there. Denise leaned against the wall, her eyes on the cement floor now. She chewed her lip before answering. My contract's up in 60 days. Marcus said he'd tank my reappointment if I didn't cooperate. He's done it before, had 2 people voted off for incompetence. You think there's a maintenance shortage? There's not. There's just turnover. So you let him open the door. She nodded once, a hard, ashamed nod. I didn't know she was home, she repeated, but it sounded smaller this time. Dean didn't offer forgiveness. He didn't have it in him. But he did know a line when he saw it, between the guilty and the afraid. You still have access to the internal request queue? Denise stiffened again. Yes. Then I need logs. The master key request. Any documentation. Anything showing protocol was skipped, off record or not. She hesitated. It'll come back on me. No, Dean said. It'll come back on him. But only if we're smart about it. She looked up at him, uncertain, but something in her eyes flickered. Recognition, maybe, or just relief at being seen. Dean took a step back. Think about it. But don't take too long. As he walked down the hall, he could feel her eyes on him the whole way. She didn't want to be a whistleblower. She wanted to keep her job, her place, her name off the next bulletin board meeting notes. But she'd seen Rachel, and that image wouldn't unstick itself. Drop a like if you've ever had to choose between doing your job and doing what's right, Dean muttered as he keyed back into his unit. And subscribe. This next part's going to test both of us. Rachel was asleep now, or trying to be. The monitor blinked soft green beside her. Safe, for now. Dean sat at his desk, pulled up the internal map of Shadow Glen's security protocols, and waited for the ping. If Denise sent him anything at all, it would be the first proof that the walls were cracking. He didn't need an army. He just needed one person inside to stop pretending everything was fine. The hallway monitor lit up again. Denise hadn't moved from the elevator, but her clipboard was down. The violation notice was hand-delivered, not mailed, not emailed. Hand-delivered by one of Marcus's junior board members while Dean was walking Rachel, carefully, slowly, back from her prenatal checkup. They'd made it halfway across the parking lot when the man in a blue HOA windbreaker stepped out from behind the building's brick corner like he was delivering subpoenas. No greeting, just a hard envelope held flat between 2 fingers. For Unit 4D, he said, already turning to leave. Dean didn't take it. He waited until the guy dropped it on the hood of their car and disappeared around the dumpster. Rachel reached for it, but Dean shook his head. I'll handle it. He guided her into the passenger seat and buckled her in gently. She didn't say a word the whole drive back, just stared out the window like the street outside was a memory already fading. When they got home, he peeled open the envelope. Notice of daily violation fines, lock system non-compliance. They were fining him $200 per day, retroactive to the date of the unauthorized modification. Dean felt the heat rise up his neck. That modification was the same one approved last quarter under the HOA's own conditional medical exemption policy. He flipped the page. The fine structure continued for refusal to comply with visual inspection, obstruction of routine compliance procedures, and inappropriate resident conduct during an official HOA action inappropriate conduct. Dean set the letter on the counter and pressed his palms flat against the granite. Rachel's monitor beeped gently from the bedroom, pulse steady, oxygen normal. She didn't need this, none of it. And now they were risking her peace and their finances. Dean turned back to his laptop and pulled up the legal packet he'd been quietly building. Screenshots, export logs, timestamps, camera frames, export receipts. He'd redacted Rachel's face, blurred anything personal. The goal wasn't sympathy, it was exposure. Marcus had escalated, which meant Dean was free to do the same. He opened his secure drive and created a folder, /Shadow Glen _witnessed violations, / Then he copied the full hallway clip, complete with Marcus's unannounced entry, Denise's hesitation, and Rachel's stumble into the frame. and queued it for conversion. He still hadn't heard from Denise, but something told him she hadn't made peace with her silence. Still, he needed leverage. That meant corroboration, not just from her, from someone official. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. A former client came to mind, Caleb Anders, a property law consultant who'd helped him navigate a zoning dispute back when he was still contracting for high-rise systems. Caleb had contacts in city planning, HOA compliance review boards, and occasionally local press. Dean tapped record and left a voice message. "Caleb, it's Navarro. I've got a situation unfolding at my condo that involves potential abuse of master key authority, false fines, and possibly coercion of HOA contractors. You know anyone in local housing regulation or media who handles these kinds of aggressive compliance stories? I've got footage and timestamps. Let me know." He ended the message, then walked to the balcony. Below him, Shadow Glen looked like every other planned community. Neatly trimmed shrubs, identical balconies, a muted color palette of suburban control. But the people inside those walls, they were cracking. A door slammed across the courtyard. Dean watched as an older man stormed down the stairs with a bright orange violation notice stuck to his mailbox. Another one. This wasn't isolated. It wasn't just them. Dean stepped back inside and opened a private unlisted video link. He uploaded the footage, added context, and password protected it. A temporary solution. But once he had more witnesses, once the stories started overlapping, the password would come off. "Drop a like if you've ever seen power misused behind a clean uniform," he whispered, almost to himself. "Subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when we shine a light on it." The monitor beeped again, this time from his desktop. New message, unknown sender, subject, "for what it's worth." Attached, a screenshot of the master key access log. The internal file header read, "Manual override request, approved by M. Bellamy." No witness present. Dean didn't need to guess who'd sent it. He just smiled, saved it to the folder, and renamed it "The Crack Starts." Here, the log Denise sent was enough to crack open the door. Dean's next move was to kick it wide. He worked fast. The moment Rachel was asleep, he set up a digital sandbox, isolated, encrypted, trace-proof. Not because he feared being hacked, but because he didn't want Marcus or anyone on the HOA tech committee knowing what he was building until it was too late. Every key override, every access request, every routine inspection was processed through the HOA's Smart Access cloud system, hosted by a vendor Marcus had personally signed off on. Dean didn't need backdoors or admin credentials. He just needed metadata, and that, ironically, was the one thing most tyrants never thought to erase. He pulled the override log from his own unit and layered it beside the HOA's master event calendar. The times didn't line up. Dean frowned. According to the public calendar, no inspection had been scheduled for Unit 4D on that day, or any day that week. But the override was triggered at 11:42 a.m., logged as an emergency access check, which meant Marcus had manually flagged the entry as urgent without board review. That alone was a breach of HOA procedure, but Dean wasn't done. He checked the next unit, 4C, same day. 9:17 a.m., override, then 4B. The day before, 3 unannounced entries in less than 48 hours, all without resident, acknowledgement, or documented emergencies. Dean's stomach tightened. He wasn't just dealing with negligence, he was dealing with a pattern. He moved to the server audit logs. Normally these were protected under user privacy rules, but HOA admin activity? Public domain, especially when abuse was suspected. With a little bit of code, he scraped the logs for any override requests containing Marcus's admin signature. 32 entries in the last 60 days. Only 4 of them were listed on the HOA's inspection calendar. Dean opened a folder and dragged in the data. 32 unaudited entries. He added a short, annotated README. System logs indicate repeated misuse of master, override access by HOA Vice President Marcus Bellamy. Of the 32 manual entries flagged under his admin ID, only 4 were scheduled or approved under public board notice. The remaining 28 entries have no consent records or follow-up forms logged. That wasn't just an overreach, that was a liability disaster waiting to explode, especially for a community with multiple elderly residents, high-risk tenants like Rachel, and families with underage children. Dean opened his contact app and pulled up Caleb Anders again. No response yet. He tapped out a message. Abuse pattern confirmed. 28 unauthorized entries. Data folder available on request. Need media or legal contact as soon as possible. His fingers hovered for a moment before adding, Rachel isn't safe here unless this goes public. I'm done playing quiet, he hit send. Then he sat back and stared at the screen. The air monitor blinked green behind him, Rachel's steady rhythm reminding him of everything he was fighting for, and everything Marcus had almost destroyed. Dean clicked back to the original video footage. This time, he didn't stop at the moment Rachel stepped into the hall. He let it run, past her hands grabbing at the doorframe, past the way she looked up in confusion, all the way to the instant Denise stepped into frame, saw her, and froze. Dean slowed it to 50% speed. Even in silence, the story was loud. He grabbed the full clip and stitched it together with a screen capture of the log Denise sent. Then a shot of the override calendar. Then his RADME file. A 58-second video. Short. Undeniable. He saved it under a new name, patternofpower.mp4. Just then, his phone buzzed. New message. Caleb Anders. Got someone. Reporter at the Register covers HOA corruption. Send what you have. She'll run it through editorial and legal. Dean replied with the link. Then, after a breath, tell her this isn't just one family's story. It's a template. He watched the file upload, the bar crawling across the screen like a countdown. Drop a like if you've ever caught someone abusing a system they swore to protect, he muttered, and subscribe. This pattern's about to go public behind him, Rachel stirred. Her monitor blinked steady, unbothered. She didn't know it yet, but they'd just crossed the line between private victim and public witness. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Dean heard the crash before he saw her, a sharp, brittle shatter, like glass against tile. He was halfway down the hallway before he realized the noise had come from the bathroom. The door was open, the air monitor was blinking red. Rachel was on the floor. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even speaking. She was gripping the countertop with both hands, knuckles white, trying to stay upright as vomit pooled beside the broken remains of a mason jar she'd dropped, trying to reach water. Dean dropped to her side. I'm fine, she whispered, but her lips were pale and dry, and her robe was damp with sweat. He didn't ask. He just lifted her, careful and slow, and got her to the couch. As soon as she was settled, he pressed the biometric call button on the monitor. It pinged her OB's office, flagged her vitals, and set an automated response in motion. 2 minutes later, the phone rang. While Rachel gave clipped, stubborn answers to the nurse on the other end, Dean stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter and listening. Blood pressure, elevated. Heart rate, unstable. Stress trigger, confirmed. The nurse recommended hospitalization, just to monitor. Rachel declined. Dean didn't push, but inside, something clicked. This wasn't about violations. It wasn't about rules. It was about Rachel. And they were out of time. When the call ended, Rachel leaned back, one arm across her belly. I'm okay, she whispered again, like she needed to believe it before he did. Dean nodded, but in his head, something had shifted. They weren't going to navigate this. They weren't going to submit another appeal, or send another certified letter, or attend another closed-door board meeting that ended in nothing but shrugs. Marcus had made a tactical mistake. He'd ignored the human cost. Dean wouldn't. He sat at his desk and opened the secure folder. The 58-second clip was there. So were the logs, the redacted footage, the testimonies he'd started collecting. Quiet stories from residents who had, until now, only whispered their frustrations across the dog park. He clicked into the news submission page that Caleb's contact had sent him. Upload, complete. Confirmation email, received. Review status, pending. Dean didn't need it to go viral. He just needed it to go visible. That was the problem with people like Marcus. They thrived on silence, on procedure, on victims who didn't know how to fight in public, but Dean did. He posted a private link in 3 HOA community Facebook groups, then in a subreddit for HOA horror stories. He blurred Rachel's face again, but left the soundless footage intact. He added one line of text. HOA uses master key to force entry on pregnant woman, caught on hallway camera. 10 minutes later, the video had 50 views. 20 minutes after that, a message pinged from a neighbor. "Thank you. I thought I was going crazy. He did the same to my place last month. I have a ring clip. Want it?" Dean's heart thudded once. He wrote back, "Yes." Immediately, he barely heard the knock at the door. It was Denise. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was pulled back with a pen jammed through it, and her name badge hung crooked on her lanyard, but in her hand was a manila folder. "I know I shouldn't be here," she said, "but they're meeting tonight. Marcus is trying to rush a motion to ban personal security devices. If it passes, every camera you've got comes down." Dean took the folder. Inside, 2 internal memos, both stamped as draft, not for circulation. One included a clause about authorizing selective unit inspections under Schedule B emergency powers. "That schedule doesn't exist," Denise said quietly. I checked. Dean almost smiled. Almost. "Drop a like if you've ever seen a bully panic when the truth starts leaking," he muttered to himself, then looked at her. "And subscribe, because they just showed us exactly how scared they are." Denise hesitated at the threshold. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," Dean said. "And you shouldn't either." She nodded once, then turned and walked away. He watched her go. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 2 years. "Caleb," he said when it connected. "Line up your contact. I want that footage published before the HOA meets tonight, and I want my wife safe before the sun goes down." The file Denise had dropped off was good, but not enough. Dean needed more than drafts and unofficial memos. He needed proof that Marcus knew he was abusing power and was trying to cover it. So, when Denise called an hour before the HOA meeting, he was already sitting in the passenger seat of her parked car, engine off, windows cracked, and adrenaline humming in his blood. "I can't give this to you officially," she said, voice low. "You didn't get this from me. I don't even know how it ended up on my desktop." Dean looked at her. She wouldn't meet his eyes. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and set it on the center console like it was radioactive. Her fingers trembled slightly as she let go. "It's a screen recording," she said. "Internal chat system. Marcus forgot to log out. IT runs routine backups. I guess someone tagged his admin account for review. Probably nothing serious. But this, I saw your name, your unit number." Rachel's Dean picked up the drive. "Why now?" Denise stared out the windshield. "Because I watched her fall. I watched her panic and retreat and cover herself with shaking hands, and Marcus just moved on. Like she was an object in the way she finally looked at him, eyes glassy, jaw set. I didn't sign up for that. I don't want to be part of that." Dean nodded once. "You're not." He pocketed the drive. "She's okay," he added quietly. "For now." "I'm not," Denise whispered. Dean didn't answer that. Back in his unit, he plugged in the drive. It was exactly what she said. A screen recording of an internal board chat, time-stamped 3 days before the violation. Marcus had written, "Navarro's system isn't responding to override pings. If we don't get eyes on that lock, we lose precedent. He's got footage. His wife's got medical clearance. We move now or not at all." Another board member responded, "That's aggressive," Marcus replied. "He builds systems for a living. You think he won't use that footage if she gets spooked? I'm not playing defense." Dean sat back in his chair. It wasn't just a mistake. It was premeditated. He layered the chat footage into the video he'd started earlier, now titled /precedent.mp4/, and overlaid Marcus's quote at the exact moment Rachel's face appeared on screen. The visual was damning, but the context, that was the bullet. "Drop a like if you've ever caught someone admitting guilt in their own words," Dean whispered to the screen. "And subscribe, because this just turned from HOA drama into legal evidence." He emailed the full file to Caleb, marked URGENT, and copied in the reporter. Then he printed out a transcript of the chat and the violation notice they'd delivered in the parking lot. He paper-clipped them together and slid them into a slim black folder. Rachel was asleep again. He kissed her forehead gently. "I'll be back before this thing starts," he said softly. "And when I come home, it's not just going to be us who knows what they did." Downstairs, he met Denise by the building exit. "You're not going in?" she asked. "I am," Dean said, holding up the folder, "but I'm not going in alone." Denise followed him to the HOA meeting, held in the community rec room, same space that hosted game nights, wine tastings, and the occasional awkward baby shower. Tonight, it was standing room only. Word had spread. Dean walked to the front, folder in hand, and took the seat directly across from Marcus. The board VP didn't flinch, but he did glance at the camera tripod someone had set up in the back corner of the room. Dean smiled. They were rolling. Let Marcus pretend this was business as usual. Let him try to spin it. This wasn't a compliance issue anymore. This was evidence in motion. Dean didn't speak during the first half of the meeting. He sat with his folder unopened on his lap, watching Marcus lean into the microphone with that same tight grin he wore in every newsletter photo. Calm, professional, untouchable. "The HOA board is considering updates to our digital compliance infrastructure," Marcus said smoothly. "This includes revisions to our personal surveillance guidelines to ensure resident privacy and alignment with community policy." Dean almost laughed. That was Marcus's game. Make the crime sound like policy. Wrap every overreach in legalese so no one noticed until it hurt. Denise sat 3 chairs away, still quiet, still unreadable. Across the room, Caleb had slipped in unnoticed. He wasn't there as a lawyer. He was there as a witness. Dean reached into his jacket and tapped the thumb drive he'd placed in the inner pocket. He didn't need to pull it yet, not until the moment would sting the most. But he was ready. After 15 minutes of procedural updates, Marcus shifted gears. "Item 4, he said, security audit enforcement. Several units have deviated from the approved standard locks. Board recommendation, mandatory hardware resets by the HOA certified vendor. Deadline, 10 days. He looked directly at Dean, didn't blink. Dean leaned forward and raised his hand. The room went quiet. "Mr. Navarro," Marcus said with mock politeness. Dean's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'd like to request a community vote on the board's emergency override usage protocol. Specifically, I'd like to propose a moratorium on master key entries unless documented by a third-party witness and verified as an actual emergency by the HOA's insurance carrier." Marcus didn't move. Someone in the back muttered, "About damn time." Dean stood. "I have evidence that the board, specifically Mr. Bellamy, has used emergency override protocols without board approval or resident notice over 24 times in the past 60 days. I also have video documentation of one such entry on my unit during which my wife, a high-risk pregnancy patient on medical bed rest, was forcibly exposed without cause or warning." The murmur grew louder. Dean opened the folder, removed the transcript, and held it up. "This is a chat log from the board's own communication server. In it, Mr. Bellamy admits that the entry was strategic, not emergency-based. He states, and I quote, 'We move now or not at all.'" Someone gasped. A woman in the 3rd row stood. "He did the same thing to my kid's room." Dean kept going. "I've uploaded all footage to a secure drive. I've given it to legal counsel. And I've handed it off to the press. So no, this won't be quietly resolved in subcommittee." Marcus finally spoke. "This isn't the forum." "It is now," Dean cut in, "because this forum has been your shield. No longer, drop a like if you've ever watched someone get caught red-handed and still try to gaslight a room," he muttered to the woman beside him. She nodded slowly, eyes locked on Marcus. Dean stepped away from the mic and let the silence do its work. He wasn't the only one who'd come prepared. Caleb stood next, introduced himself formally, and laid out the legal implications: liability, insurance revocation, civil exposure. He didn't threaten. He explained, and it landed. When he was done, Denise walked to the front and added only one sentence. "I was ordered to unlock Unit 4, D. I regret it deeply, but I saw it, and it happened exactly the way Mr. Navarro described. No one moved for several seconds. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. One person, then two. Dean didn't smile. Not yet. He glanced toward the back of the room, where the camera's red light blinked. They had the footage. They had the confession. Now, they had the room. Dean didn't leave the meeting with a victory. He left with a countdown. The board had agreed, reluctantly, to delay the proposed security hardware reset vote for 72 hours pending an emergency session, 3 days. That was all the time he had to finish the job. He spent the first night not sleeping, but working. He compiled every violation story submitted after the meeting. By morning, the inbox he'd set up, report at shadowglenwatch.org, had over 40 entries. Photos of fines taped to front doors, screenshots of ignored emails, video clips of unannounced entries, even one audio recording of Marcus threatening a tenant with eviction if they didn't comply quietly. Dean didn't curate, he archived. Then he started building. Not just a case, but a platform. A one-page microsite, plain black on white. No design, no distractions. Welcome to Shadow Glen, a community on mute. These are the violations no one wanted to believe. Until now. Below that, he embedded the video, precedent.mp4, with a warning, viewer discretion advised. Content includes footage of an unauthorized home entry involving a pregnant resident. Below that, every submission. Redacted for privacy. Group by category. Unauthorized entry retaliation. Fines threatening language, procedural manipulation. Each one linked back to a time-stamped folder. Dean didn't ask for donations. He didn't need to. Visibility was the currency. He shared the link with Caleb, who passed it to his media contact. She responded in under 5 minutes. Publishing this Friday. Tell your neighbors to be ready. Dean looked at the clock. That gave him 48 hours. The next move was the alliance. He reached out to the woman from the meeting, the one who said Marcus entered her kid's room. Her name was Janelle, single mom, nurse, part-time student. She told him the HOA fined her $600 for emergency hazard clearance after her son left LEGOS outside his door. Would you speak at the next meeting? Dean asked. If it means he stops threatening people like me? I'll bring the LEGOS, she said. He added her to the list. Next, a former HOA president from 5 years ago, now quietly renting his unit after resigning under pressure. The man still had documents from his tenure, bylaws, procedural voting records, old board minutes that Marcus had since streamlined. Dean asked for one thing, proof that Marcus had bypassed a vote when taking over override authority. The man smiled and dropped a PDF into Dean's inbox. By Thursday morning, the microsite had over 600 views. By Thursday evening, a local podcast had picked up the story. Dean didn't care about going viral. He cared about going undeniable. Inside the condo, Rachel watched him work. She didn't ask for updates anymore. She just held his hand when he paused and reminded him to breathe. I'm okay, she said quietly. You shouldn't have to be, he replied. That night, the hallway monitor pinged again. Marcus. Outside Unit 4, D. He wasn't holding a clipboard this time, just standing there, staring at the door like he could intimidate it into silence. Dean walked up and opened it. They locked eyes. I'm not here to talk, Marcus said. Then leave, Dean replied. Marcus didn't move. You don't know what you've started. Dean stepped out, closed the door behind him. No, he said. You don't. Marcus left first. Dean went back inside and added one final line to the microsite. They said it was just a misunderstanding. This is what a misunderstanding looks like when no one's watching. Then he hit schedule. Friday, 6 a.m., publish. He looked at the blinking red dot on his hallway camera and muttered, drop a like if you've ever wanted to shine a light on someone hiding behind a badge, and subscribe. Because tomorrow, this goes from neighborhood drama to public record. At 5:59 a.m., Dean stood in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in his hand and the publish window open on his laptop. The condo was still dark. Rachel was asleep in the next room, her monitor blinking a calm green. Outside, sprinklers clicked on in sync across the complex like nothing had changed. Dean watched the screen. 6 a.m. Click. Shadowglenwatch.org went live. He didn't feel triumph, not yet. Just a steady, focused stillness. Within 20 minutes, the site had 300 unique visitors. By 7 a.m., it was over 1,000. Then a retweet from the HOA Horror Stories account pushed it past 3,000. Dean sat down, refreshed the analytics, and opened his email. Subject line, "We need to talk. Channel 5 wants the story." The reporter's contact had passed the site up the chain. A local TV station wanted an interview. Dean responded with a list of conditions. Rachel's face blurred. No address published. Include statements from other affected residents. 5 minutes later, they agreed. By 9:30 a.m., Caleb sent word that the HOA's legal firm had requested a delay in the emergency session. Too late. The damage was already done. Dean's phone buzzed. Janelle. "Local news van just pulled up. I'm on my way to your unit. Let's do this." He met her outside with a printed statement and a shared look of understanding. She'd brought the LEGOS. She held up one, blue, chewed on one corner. "Apparently this was a code violation," she said to the camera. "Marcus Bellamy said my son was creating a hazard." Dean stood beside her, calm and grounded. "We've seen what happens when people with just enough authority and zero accountability are given keys to our doors. But what happens next? That's up to all of us." The clip aired on the noon news. Rachel watched from the couch, one hand resting on her stomach. By 2 p.m., Dean received a cease and desist letter from the HOA attorney. Thinly veiled threats about defamation and breach of community confidentiality. He posted it to the microsite under a new tab, Suppression Attempts. By 4 p.m., Caleb confirmed that Marcus had called an emergency private board session. Dean wasn't invited, didn't matter. By 5:15 p.m., the community center parking lot was overflowing. Residents who hadn't attended a meeting in years were now arriving with lawn chairs, phone cameras, and printed copies of their own violation notices. Dean arrived last. Denise met him at the door. "He's not speaking," she said. "Too risky. They're going to send the HOA president instead." Dean raised an eyebrow. "Cowards move. Strategic retreat," she said with a shrug. "But the vote is still scheduled." Inside, the air buzzed, not with hostility, but tension. Everyone knew why they were there. No one needed to say it. The president, a gray-haired woman named Marion, who hadn't been visible in the community for months, stepped up to the mic. "We acknowledge that several recent enforcement actions may have lacked proper oversight. We are committed to reviewing access policies and resident protections." Dean stood. "No." Heads turned. "We're not here for a review. We're here for a vote." He held up a document. "I propose the immediate suspension of master key access except under verified emergency conditions, witnessed by a third party, and logged on a public board accessible system." Someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, the room was filled with raised hands. The vote passed, unanimous. Dean didn't smile, not yet. Marcus wasn't in the room, but his name was on everyone's lips. Dean walked out into the cool evening air. He checked his phone. The site had passed 15,000 views. The story had gone national. He looked back at the building, at the windows glowing softly above, and he knew exactly what Part 11 would be. A confrontation. In public. With cameras rolling. The crowd formed before sunrise. By 7 a.m., the sidewalk outside the Shadow Glen HOA office looked like a protest line. Lawn chairs, coffee thermoses, phone cameras. Some residents wore homemade shirts with phrases like, "Don't knock unless you have a warrant," and "Ask before entry, always." Dean stood in the center of it all, folder in hand, press badge clipped to his collar, courtesy of Channel 5's field producer, who'd offered it after their segment hit 40,000 views overnight. He wasn't just a homeowner anymore. He was a witness, a tech expert, a husband, a headline. The meeting was supposed to be closed to the public, but after last night's vote and the release of the site, the board had no choice. Cameras were now permitted, under community transparency rules. Caleb had made sure of it. Marcus hadn't shown, but his name was listed on the agenda. Dean stepped through the office doors with Denise on one side and Janelle on the other. The rest of the room, at least 40 people, followed close behind, eyes locked on the podium at the front. Marion, the HOA president, cleared her throat. We've been advised to postpone any votes or formal decisions until our legal team completes its review of the materials submitted by Mr. Navarro. Dean raised his hand. Objection. Every camera in the room turned toward him. This isn't about legal review. It's about accountability. You allowed an individual on this board to repeatedly override unit locks under the guise of safety, with zero documentation and no emergencies logged. He stepped forward. In my case, that override forced my high-risk pregnant wife into the hallway, half-dressed and terrified. And now, you're asking us to wait? He opened the folder. Inside, hard copies of Marcus's chat log, override requests, community testimonies, and a timeline of infractions. He handed it to the board clerk. This is no longer a policy issue. It's a pattern of abuse, documented, recorded, broadcast. Denise stepped forward next. I was pressured to participate, she said. I was told I'd lose my job if I didn't help unlock their door. I'm not proud of that, but I am willing to say it in front of everyone here. The room went silent. Then Janelle stepped up, holding a plastic sandwich bag with 4 small Legos inside. This is what my son was fined for. These exact pieces. Marcus said they posed a tripping hazard. She set the bag gently on the table in front of the board. Laughter rippled through the room, bitter and raw. One by one, other residents began speaking. An elderly man described how Marcus threatened to remove his stair lift. A new mother said she'd been cited for excessive infant noise. A military veteran showed a notice for unauthorized flag display. Every voice added weight to the room. Every story chipped away at the silence Marcus had once weaponized. Dean turned back to the cameras. If you've ever felt powerless in your own home, this is your moment to take it back. If you've ever been fined for existing, recorded without consent, or pushed to the edge by petty authority, stand with us. He paused. Let the moment breathe. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to hold someone accountable in public. And subscribe, because this strategy doesn't end here. Marion leaned into the mic, her voice strained. We acknowledge the board's failure to uphold procedural transparency. Effective immediately, Marcus Bellamy is suspended from all duties pending a formal vote for removal. All override policies are frozen until further notice. The room erupted in applause. Dean didn't smile. He just turned to look out the office window, where a reporter was already narrating live coverage. Channel 5's logo hovered in the corner of the screen. They'd said he couldn't win, that no one beats the HOA. But here they were, watching. And now that they'd seen what power could look like when turned on its head, they wouldn't forget. Rachel's safety had become a community's awakening. And Marcus? He'd chosen the wrong door to unlock. The first night after Marcus was suspended, Dean slept more than 4 hours for the first time in weeks. Rachel slept too, deeply, peacefully. The air monitor blinked steady green. The condo was quiet, not with dread or waiting, but with relief. Outside, Shadow Glen was still itself. The sidewalks were clean, the roses were trimmed, but something had shifted in the air. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now waved. One man dropped off a basket of muffins with a note that said simply, "Thanks for the courage." Dean didn't need a parade. He needed peace. And now, finally, they had the beginning of it. The HOA board formally voted Marcus out 2 days later. The motion passed without a single abstention. Dean didn't attend the vote. He didn't need to. He was too busy helping draft the new override access protocol, one that required dual authentication, signed resident consent except in verified emergencies, and third-party observation. He wasn't just protecting his own home anymore. He was protecting all of them. The reporter called again, asking for a follow-up interview. The national segment had passed 100,000 views. Advocacy groups had picked it up. An attorney in another state had contacted Caleb, asking if Dean would be willing to consult on a similar HOA reform case. Dean said he'd think about it. Right now, he just wanted to take his wife for a walk. No notices on the door, no eyes watching through blinds. Just 2 people reclaiming the simple act of being left alone. He took Rachel's hand as they stepped outside. She moved slow, one hand on her belly, the late afternoon sun warming her face. They walked the loop of the courtyard path in silence until they reached the bench near the fountain, the one they'd avoided ever since Marcus used it as a compliance checkpoint. Now, it was just a bench again. Rachel sat, rested, smiled. Dean sat beside her. "You saved more than just me," she said. He shook his head. "No, I just didn't shut up. Same thing," she said softly. He looked around. The fountain trickled quietly behind them. Children laughed near the swings. A few residents passed, nodding, not out of obligation, but gratitude. Dean pulled out his phone and checked the site. shadowglenwatch.org had over 250,000 views. He added a final post. Update, Marcus Bellamy removed from board. Override policy rewritten, residents safe. And yes, Rachel's doing well. He closed the laptop, leaned back, and let himself breathe. Then he looked into the camera one last time. If you want more, stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. He smiled, not because he'd won, but because he'd shown them how. And now, someone else out there might feel just a little less powerless, might check their cameras, might call their lawyer, might say no the next time someone with a clipboard tries to use fear as a key. Because doors are meant to keep you safe, not to be opened without permission. And in this neighborhood, permission now matters.